The lunch rush at the Golden Spoon was merciless. The clatter of plates and the hiss of frying pans collided with the constant hum of conversation, creating a storm of sound that seemed impossible to navigate. Jessica wove through the crowded tables, her tray loaded with orders she was certain would spill if she so much as shifted her weight the wrong way. The air smelled of rich gravy, garlic bread, and the faint tang of lemon from the salads. She kept her back straight, forced her smile, and moved as quickly as her tired legs could carry her, her eyes darting from table to table, memorizing orders she barely had time to process. Behind her, the sound of heavy shoes hitting the floor announced the approach of Mr. Hargrove, the manager whose voice could cut glass. He had a permanent scowl, one that deepened whenever the restaurant grew even slightly chaotic, and today chaos reigned. "Jessica, stop daydreaming. That's the third table you've mixed up today," he barked, his voice booming over the cacophony. Heads turned, some customers froze mid-bite, forks hovering in the air. A few whispered to each other, curiosity and unease coloring their murmurs. Jessica's cheeks flushed a deep red. She felt the heat crawling up her neck, burning behind her ears, and she struggled to steady her trembling hands. I'm so sorry, Mr. Hargrove," she said softly, her voice barely audible. She tried to maintain her composure, tried to keep the tray level as she adjusted a plate that was teetering dangerously. "I'll fix it right away. Soft apologies won't fix mistakes," he shouted, jabbing a finger toward her chest. "Do you even care about this job?" The word care felt like a punch. Jessica did care. She cared with every ounce of strength she had left after double shifts, sleepless nights, and frantic trips to the grocery store to stretch her paycheck. She cared because she had to care, because her baby depended on her, and because she was trying to survive in a world that seemed determined to make her fail. Her hands shook as she delivered plates to the next table, the clamor of cutlery and voices filling her ears like a relentless tide. She tried to focus on the customers' faces, on the polite smiles they offered, on the quick thank yous she received, but the anger radiating from Mr. Hargrove shadowed every movement, every step, every breath, was measured against the expectation of perfection that seemed impossible to meet. Another tray of drinks rattled in her hands as she approached a table of 4. She had memorized their orders, repeated them to herself under her breath, trying to cement each dish in her mind. Just as she set the drinks down, a plate slipped from the tray, skidding across the table with a clatter that made one of the diners jump. Jessica's heart lurched. She bent quickly to catch it, knocking over a small glass in the process. "Jessica," Mr. Hargrove's voice roared again, sharp enough to make her jump so violently she nearly dropped the remaining tray. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" I'm sorry," she whispered, voice cracking. Her eyes flicked to the small pocket of her apron, where a crumpled photograph of her baby and a tiny container of formula were tucked away. The image of her sleeping child, chubby cheeks flushed pink, blinked back at her. She clenched her jaw, fighting the tears threatening to fall. Mr. Hargrove leaned closer, his shadow falling over her like a storm cloud. "I don't want excuses. I want results. Is that clear?" "Yes," she whispered, so softly that it barely reached him. Her throat felt raw, her lungs tight. She swallowed hard, trying to force words out that didn't come. She wanted to explain, to tell him that she had been up all night feeding her baby, that she had walked 3 miles this morning just to make sure she had enough money for formula, that her mistakes were not from laziness but from exhaustion and worry. But the words got stuck, tangled in fear and shame. The restaurant noise swirled around her, but her world had narrowed to the space between her and Mr. Hargrove. Every sharp syllable he uttered seemed to press against her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her grip on the tray felt precarious, and she bit her lip so hard it tasted of blood, trying to anchor herself to reality, to prevent herself from collapsing under the weight of his fury. Finally, in a moment of desperate honesty, she leaned slightly toward him, her voice barely more than a whisper. I'm just trying to buy baby formula," she admitted, each word trembling on her tongue. Time seemed to slow. The clatter of dishes, the shouting from the kitchen, the hum of conversation, all of it faded into the background. Mr. Hargrove froze mid-step, his mouth slightly open, his eyes widening in shock. Jessica's whisper, so small and vulnerable, carried a weight that no scolding could overcome. He looked down at the apron, at the tiny bottle of powdered formula peeking from the pocket, at the photograph of a sleeping baby taped hastily to the fabric. He noticed the exhaustion etched into her features, the dark circles beneath her eyes, the trembling in her hands, the fatigue that no amount of sleep could erase. For a moment, the man who seemed capable only of anger softened. The fire in his eyes dimmed, replaced by something like comprehension. Jessica's mistakes were no longer just errors, they were signs of struggle, of a life far more complicated than the restaurant walls could contain. Baby formula, he repeated, his voice lower now, uncertain, almost hesitant. Jessica nodded, biting her lip, bracing herself for the scolding she expected to follow. But it never came. Instead, Mr. Hargrove took a step back, rubbing his jaw as if the reality of her situation were a physical weight pressing down on him. Take a break, he muttered, barely audible. Go, I'll handle the tables for now. Jessica's eyes widened in disbelief. She had never heard those words from him before. She quickly set the tray down, hands still shaking, and darted behind the kitchen door, allowing herself a brief moment of release. Her shoulders sagged, and tears prickled at the corners of her eyes. She leaned against the cool wall, letting the sobs she had been holding back spill silently. The lunch rush continued without her, the restaurant noise creeping back in like a tide, but for the first time that day, Jessica felt a sliver of relief, a fleeting sense of understanding. She touched the small bottle in her pocket, feeling the familiar reassurance of knowing she could provide for her baby, even just for today. Mr. Hargrove stood near the counter, watching her retreating figure, his expression unreadable. He wasn't the kind of man who displayed emotion easily, but something about the quiet desperation in her voice had pierced the armor he wore like a shield. Something about the sight of her exhaustion, her vulnerability, and the unwavering love for her child had shifted something within him. Jessica leaned against the wall, closed her eyes, and took a shaky breath. For the first time all day, she felt seen, not just as a waitress fumbling with trays, but as a mother, a human being, someone fighting a battle he couldn't even imagine. And for that brief moment, the storm of anger and chaos that had engulfed her lifted, replaced by the fragile, comforting glow of understanding. She straightened, wiping her eyes, and whispered a quiet promise to herself. She would get through this, no matter what. Her baby needed her, and she would make sure there was. Formula in the cupboard, food on the table, and hope in her heart. And maybe, just maybe, she had glimpsed a glimmer of kindness in a place she had never expected. If you want, I can also expand scene 2 to 1,000 words next with just as much emotional depth, showing her return and the manager's gradual shift. Do you want me to do that? The restaurant had begun to quiet down by mid-afternoon. The lunch rush had tapered into a gentle trickle of customers, their conversation a soft murmur against the background hiss of the kitchen. Jessica returned, the small paper bag clutched in her hand, the baby formula safely tucked inside, slightly crushed but intact. The weight of it in her arms felt different from the weight of the trays she carried at work. It was purposeful, meaningful, and gave her a quiet sense of relief. As she stepped through the swinging doors, the familiar smells of the restaurant enveloped her. The lingering aroma of freshly baked bread, the sharp scent of vinegar from the salad station, and the faint sweetness of dessert pastries cooling on the counter. She let out a slow breath, trying to steady herself, knowing she had survived the chaos and secured what her child needed. But more than that, she felt a cautious optimism blooming inside her, fragile yet persistent. Mr. Hargrove was behind the counter, clipboard in hand, checking orders and moving with the same brisk efficiency he always had, but something in his demeanor had changed. The sharp edge that usually colored his movements and words was absent. He glanced up, saw her, and offered a small nod, subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her stomach unclench. No scolding, no raised voice. Just acknowledgement. Jessica carefully placed her bag behind the counter, making sure the formula was out of sight, but easily accessible for when she left. She adjusted her apron and took a deep breath, moving toward the next table with a tray of desserts. The regulars, a pair of older women who often visited in the early afternoon, looked up and smiled warmly as she approached. Everything okay? One of them asked gently. Jessica nodded, her lips curving into a tentative smile. Yeah, everything's fine now, she replied, her voice steadier than it had been all morning. She felt a flicker of confidence, small but insistent, pushing back against the exhaustion and anxiety that had weighed on her all day. As she set the desserts down, carefully balancing the tray, Mr. Hargrove moved closer, leaning casually against the counter. His presence was commanding yet unexpectedly calm. Look, Jessica, I didn't realize, he paused, as if weighing his words carefully. I know I've been harsh. Maybe too harsh, but I see you're trying. And that counts for something. Jessica froze, the tray shaking slightly in her hands. She blinked, searching his face for any hint of insincerity, but found none. For the first time, the man who had yelled at her relentlessly seemed to see her, not just as an employee making mistakes, but as a person, a mother, someone struggling to hold everything together. She wanted to speak, to express gratitude, to tell him how much his words meant, but the emotions caught in her throat. Instead, she smiled, a small, grateful smile that she hoped conveyed more than words ever could. The afternoon continued with a new rhythm. The tension that had once clung to her like a second skin seemed to dissipate. Jessica moved between tables with more confidence, serving meals and drinks with a lightness she hadn't felt in weeks. She even found herself sharing a laugh with a group of young men at a corner table who had jokingly argued over who got the last slice of pie. For the first time all day, she felt human, more than just a set of hands to carry plates. Mr. Hargrove observed her quietly from behind the counter, clipboard forgotten at his side. He watched the subtle shift in her demeanor, the way her shoulders relaxed, the way she interacted with the customers, the spark of determination returning to her eyes. He had never admitted it before, but he had underestimated her. He had judged her too quickly, without considering the life she carried outside these walls, the responsibilities that weighed heavily on her every day. Later, when the lunch crowd had thinned almost completely, Mr. Hargrove called her over again. She approached cautiously, unsure of what he wanted, wary that the previous moment of understanding was just temporary. Jessica, he began quietly, lowering his voice so it didn't carry to the kitchen staff, I've been thinking. If you ever need a little flexibility, don't be afraid to ask. We can work something out. Shifts, hours, whatever you need to take care of your child. Jessica's chest tightened, and tears threatened to spill, but this time they were tears of relief, of hope, of gratitude. She nodded, barely able to form the words. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I really appreciate that. As she returned to the floor, carrying a fresh tray of desserts for a small table near the window, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in weeks. The restaurant didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. The customers smiled, the staff moved with ease, and the afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, painting the tables in warm, golden light. When she set down the last plate, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, to feel the quiet pride in her accomplishment. She had secured the formula, navigated the chaos, endured the scolding, and returned with renewed strength. Her baby would have what they needed, and she had survived another day. More than that, she had glimpsed kindness in the most unlikely place. As the day wound down and the final customers left, Jessica gathered her things, tucking the baby formula safely into her bag once more. Mr. Hargrove approached one last time, a rare softness in his expression. Good work today, he said simply. No sarcasm, no judgment, just an acknowledgement that carried more weight than any reprimand ever could. Jessica smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile, and nodded. Thanks, she replied, feeling a quiet warmth bloom inside her. Walking home that evening, the small bag with the formula swinging gently at her side, Jessica felt a profound sense of resilience. She had faced the storm of scolding, exhaustion, and fear, and she had emerged stronger. The world outside the restaurant was still challenging, still uncertain, but she carried something precious inside her: hope, determination, and the knowledge that even the hardest people could show understanding. By the time she reached her apartment, the sun was low on the horizon, casting a soft glow over the city streets. She set the bag down and pulled the formula out, smiling at the familiar packaging, the small reassurance it represented. Her baby's needs were met, at least for today, and she had discovered something more, a reminder that compassion could exist even in unlikely places, that human connection and understanding could be found amidst anger and chaos. That night, as she prepared a warm bottle for her baby, Jessica held onto the memory of Mr. Hargrove's quiet words and the small, unexpected moment of grace he had offered. She had survived the day, and tomorrow, she would do it again. But now, she carried with her a quiet strength, a sense of hope, and the knowledge that sometimes, even in a world that seemed harsh and unforgiving, people could surprise you. And in that surprise, there was the possibility of something better, a little kindness, a little understanding, and the courage to keep moving forward. If you want, I can also create cinematic, emotionally rich image prompts for this expanded scene too so you could visualize it perfectly. Do you want me to do that?